Overcoming pain and maintaining sanity. My real-life experience with a dysfunctional family. My name is Samara. I'm 27 years old, and I never imagined that one day my own home would become an emotional battlefield. I woke up that day without realizing that life would force me to set boundaries I hadn't even known I needed. My father, Fernando, had hidden something that changed everything. He had a daughter born out of wedlock. Until then, I had a family I believed was relatively normal, with my brother Samuel, my mother, and a routine that seemed safe. When Liliane, that daughter, showed up with her mother, Viviane, demanding I take responsibility for her, I felt a mixture of shock, anger, and exhaustion that I couldn't contain. I wanted to scream, but I had neither the space nor the strength, just a tightness in my chest that felt like it would crush me from the inside out. At that moment, I realized it wasn't just a problem in my life. It was as if the ground had dropped out from under me, and I needed to immediately decide how to react. It wasn't just the shock of discovering Liliane's existence that shook me. It was the weight of the pressure that came with it. Fernando expected me to be understanding, to welcome someone I barely knew, while I already had my own life to deal with. I was graduating from the career I'd worked hard to build for years, facing my own fears and challenges. And suddenly, the world seemed to be telling me my achievements didn't matter, that my opinion about my own home and boundaries was worthless. I felt angry at myself for feeling guilty for not wanting to embrace something I'd never asked for, and ashamed for feeling like I was somehow failing as a daughter. It was a whirlwind of mixed emotions. Fear of exposing myself, of getting hurt, of creating conflict with my brother, who seemed divided, and a sense of helplessness that left me exhausted. Samuel, my brother, was caught in the middle of it all and seemed unsure of where to stand. I could see his dilemma, trying to balance family loyalty with the pressure from Viviane and Liliane. I felt a lack of security, and Paula, his girlfriend, pregnant and scared, seemed increasingly emotionally distant, overwhelmed by the heavy atmosphere. Looking at her gave me a pang in my heart because I understood her anxiety. Deep down, I felt angry at everyone. At my father, for creating chaos and expecting me to fix it. At Liliane's mother, for placing the responsibility on me. At Liliane, for arriving as if I were obligated to welcome her. But at the same time, I knew anger wouldn't solve anything. I needed to breathe, think, find clarity. And it was that day, looking at all this, that I realized, if I didn't set boundaries, if I didn't protect myself, no one else would. The tension grew even more when I faced a conversation that seemed inevitable. Viviane spoke with a cold calm, trying to manipulate me, while Liliane looked at me, waiting for approval. I felt my stomach ache, my hands tremble, and an absurd exhaustion that stemmed from the internal struggle. I wanted to scream, cry, run away, but I needed to act clearly. It was then that I realized the first thing I needed to do was protect my sanity, my peace, my own life. I began to map out in my head how to speak firmly, how to set boundaries without exploding, without blaming myself. Every word I thought, every gesture I calculated, was a defense of who I was and everything I had built. I felt that this was the moment that would change everything, that would define how far I would or would not give in to protect my space. As everything unfolded, Diane, my best friend, stood by me without judgment, holding my hand both literally and emotionally. Her presence was a reminder that I didn't have to face this alone. I felt strength grow within me, a mix of anger, fear, and resilience. I realized that, even with everything crumbling around me, I had the power to decide who I would let into my life, who I would allow to affect me, and what boundaries were non-negotiable. It was a turning point. I felt fear, pain, and exhaustion, but also clarity. For the first time that day, I realized that surviving this didn't mean being cold or harsh, but protecting my life and my emotional sanity. I was still in shock, but I was beginning to feel like I could bounce back, that I didn't need to carry the guilt. After that initial conversation, I spent a few hours alone in my room trying to organize my thoughts. My body was tired, my mind felt like it was spinning in circles, but I needed to get everything in order. I thought about what it meant to have clear boundaries. It wasn't just saying no, it was taking responsibility for myself, protecting my space, and not letting myself be manipulated by guilt or emotional blackmail. I remembered every moment I'd given in out of fear of conflict and realized I was tired of sabotaging myself. I felt sadness, yes, but also a determination that surprised me. I began to write, jotting down every feeling, every decision I needed to make. It was a simple exercise, but it gave me clarity. For the first time that day, I felt I could look at my own life as something deserving of respect and care, without giving up who I was or everything I'd worked to achieve. When I went down to the living room, I saw Samuel and Paula talking in the corner. The atmosphere was tense, and I realized that her pregnancy made everything even more delicate. She was scared, afraid of what this situation could mean for their future. I saw in her eyes a reflection of what I felt inside: insecurity, exhaustion, and an overwhelming desire to escape that chaos. I was angry at everything and everyone, but I realized I could only control my own actions. I took a deep breath and decided to stand firm, but without destruction. I spoke to Samuel, looking him in the eye, explaining that I needed to set clear boundaries, that I couldn't take on responsibilities that weren't mine. He seemed conflicted, but he listened, and I felt a small victory in that moment, the realization that I could put myself first without feeling guilty. The hardest part was confronting Viviane and Liliane directly. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of years of secrets and unreasonable expectations. My voice trembled, my heart pounded, but I managed to speak clearly. It wasn't personal rejection. It was protection of my life and my space. Every word that came out was an exercise in courage. I felt afraid of hurting them, afraid of their reaction, but I also realized I could no longer allow emotional manipulation. It was painful, exhausting, but liberating. For the first time, I felt that my opinion carried weight, that my decisions mattered, and that my emotional sanity was a top priority. Deep down, I knew Liliane was also suffering from this whole situation, but at that moment, I needed to put my life first. After this conversation, I went back to my room and cried like never before. I cried for everything that was lost, for everything I didn't choose to carry, for feeling angry at my own father, for seeing my brother divided and my life turned upside down. But through the tears, I felt something new: strength. I understood that my overcoming wouldn't be about fixing the entire family, nor about pleasing everyone, but about taking care of myself, about respecting my limits, and understanding that despite everything, I could choose how I would deal with that situation. I realized I didn't need to carry guilt for not being the person my father or Viviane expected me to be. Diane accompanied me as I breathed, drying my tears and reminding me that no one can define who we are but ourselves. It was there, in that moment of pain and clarity, that I felt the first genuine relief since it all began. My body was tired, my mind exhausted, but something inside me shifted, the realization that it was possible to survive the emotional chaos, that my voice and my choices had value. I understood that overcoming pain isn't about eliminating pain, but learning to walk with it, without losing myself, without allowing the manipulation and mistakes of others to define my life. It was a silent but powerful turning point. That day, I realized I needed to distance myself emotionally to protect myself. Every look, every word from Viviane and Fernando felt like an attempt to manipulate me, and I couldn't give in anymore. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness, because part of me still wanted to believe my family could be different, but the reality was too harsh. I needed to be honest with myself and admit that life isn't fair, that not every blood relationship brings care or responsibility. It was painful to accept this, but at the same time, liberating. For the first time, I felt I had real power over my choices and my space, and that I no longer had to carry the weight of what wasn't my obligation. Meanwhile, Samuel was struggling to figure out where he fit in, and I realized I couldn't shield him from everything. He needed to face his own choices and take responsibility for the life he was building, especially with Paula expecting a child. Seeing him so divided hurt, but it also made me reflect on the importance of maintaining clarity and not getting swept up in other people's emotional turmoil. It was a hard but necessary lesson. Not everyone will act as we expect. Not everyone will support us the way we need, and that's okay. I could only control my actions and my responses. During the afternoon, Liliane approached, and for the first time, I noticed a fragility in her that I hadn't noticed before. She was confused, insecure, and Viviane's pressure seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. I felt a pang of compassion, but I also knew I couldn't let myself get too emotionally involved in a way that would compromise my sanity. It was at that moment that I understood that overcoming isn't just about defending yourself, but also about seeing others clearly, acknowledging suffering without getting lost in it. I could be firm without being cruel, set boundaries without denying humanity. As night fell, I felt a deep physical and emotional exhaustion. My body ached with tension, and my mind still seemed to be spinning, but there was something different, a sense of control and clarity that hadn't existed before. I had set clear boundaries, protected my space, and put myself first without guilt. I still felt pain and anger, but there was also a quiet hope, a strength I hadn't known existed within me. For the first time that day, I realized it was possible to face pain without letting it consume me. Before going to sleep, I wrote everything down in a notebook, trying to organize my emotions. I relived every moment, every feeling, and realized that the turning point wasn't a grand, heroic gesture, but rather the decision to put myself first, to not give in to manipulation and pressure. I understood that my overcoming isn't about erasing pain or changing others, but about having the clarity, courage, and resilience to deal with real life, with people who make mistakes, and with situations that seem unfair. It was an intense, painful, yet liberating learning experience, and for the first time, I felt I could move forward without fear of losing my true self. The next day, I woke up still feeling the weight of everything, but with something different: clarity. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to carry anyone's expectations but my own. I knew Fernando and Vivian would keep trying to pressure me, but I had already defined my limits, and that gave me strength. Samuel was still confused, Lilian still sought approval, but I realized I didn't need to solve everything. I learned that overcoming is precisely about this: keeping breathing, maintaining one's sanity, even when everything around me seems to be falling apart. Feeling fear and anger didn't make me weak. They made me human. I spent a few hours alone, reflecting on my choices. It was painful to realize that part of my adult life had always been about compensating for the absences and expectations of others. With Lilian's sudden appearance, it became clear that I could no longer take on responsibilities that weren't my own. My heart ached, knowing she was suffering too, but I learned that I couldn't carry another person's life on my shoulders. It was a moment of harsh but necessary acceptance. I understood that taking care of myself doesn't mean being selfish, but protecting my emotional sanity and peace, and that this is essential to being able to handle any difficult situation without losing myself. Samuel finally began to understand my position, and I realized I didn't need to force him to choose, but simply to make my point clearly. Paula, who was emotionally exhausted, found relief in knowing I wouldn't allow chaos in their lives. Feeling that my decisions could bring security to someone I love was a huge boost. For the first time, I felt in control of my own life, that my voice carried weight, and that my ability to resist and set boundaries was real. This sense of clarity and strength gave me hope that I could face any future challenge without losing myself. That afternoon, I sat down with Diane and we talked at length. She helped me put into words what I was feeling: fear, anger, sadness, but also resilience and strength. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time, I realized I didn't have to face everything alone. Having someone who understood my pain without judgment, who supported me without trying to control me, made a huge difference. I felt validated, understood, and this gave me the courage to stay strong, to not give in to the emotional pressures and expectations of a family that often failed to act responsibly. As night fell, I sat alone again and took a deep breath. I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. For the first time, I realized that overcoming is not about defeating others or changing what cannot be changed, but about standing firm, protecting your life, your space, and your sanity. I still felt pain and anger, but there was a sense of strength and clarity I had never experienced before. That day was my silent turning point. I realized I could bounce back, that my life didn't need to be defined by the mistakes or manipulations of others, and that my sanity and peace were my absolute priorities. In the days that followed, I felt the difference in what happened at that turning point. Every time Fernando or Vivian tried to pressure me, I remembered what I felt that day: fear, anger, exhaustion, but also strength and clarity. Remembering that turning point helped me maintain boundaries, protect my sanity, and not give in to emotional manipulation. I realized that overcoming obstacles isn't a one-time act, but a daily practice. Choosing your own life, even when it hurts, even when it's difficult. Lilian kept showing up, and I sensed her insecurity and confusion. I learned to deal with this without losing myself, setting clear boundaries without being cruel. I discovered that it's possible to see suffering in others and still protect yourself. It was a human and painful learning experience, understanding that we can't save everyone, but we can act with clarity and respect while maintaining our own sanity. Samuel began to position himself better. Paula found more security, and I felt that my choice not to give in to the emotional chaos had a positive impact on those around me. I felt proud of myself, even recognizing that there was still pain and conflict. Overcoming the challenges didn't erase them, but it gave me power over my life, and the sense of control brought real hope for a more balanced and secure future. Looking back, I see that day as a milestone, a day when life forced me to set limits and showed me that strength doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from facing it. I felt anger, fear, sadness, but also strength, clarity, and courage. I realized that my peace and emotional sanity are priorities, and that learning to protect them is an act of self-love. Today, even though I'm still dealing with parts of the pain, I'm proud of what I accomplished that day. I survived a seemingly impossible situation, set boundaries, took care of myself, and was able to see others clearly without losing myself. I learned that overcoming doesn't mean the absence of suffering, but rather the strength to live despite it. And it's this strength I carry every day, remembering that I can bounce back, maintain my peace, and move forward, even when everything around me seems to be falling apart.